there's a lot of news about going to Mars. And obviously, Elon Musk has led a lot of that conversation, and that's big, perhaps, on the psyche. But you have some plans to go to Venus. Is that right?
Not myself personally, but we definitely have plans to explore Venus for sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the plans to Venus and, what kind of work you're doing in the meantime to get prepared to go to Venus?
Sure, I can do that. But first, let's start kind of bigger picture.
Okay.
We have, Earth, Venus, and Mars, kind of all siblings, actually. And you know how I think of Venus? I think of Venus like the ignored sibling. Like, do you have a sibling? You know how there's that one brother or sister who gets all the attention?
Yeah.
Wait, were you that
Yes.
one? Were you that sibling?
I mean, it's only me and my brother, so it's pretty split. It's pretty split
I see
between
your
us.
face. Well, usually there's one gets all the attention. That's Mars. People want to go to Mars, boots on Mars. We send so many spacecraft that land on Mars, that orbit Mars. Venus is like that quiet, unknown sibling that never really gets to shine. And in the past, we did send many spacecraft. The former Soviet Union sent over a dozen spacecraft to Venus. Some even landed on the surface and sent a signal back. NASA sent a probe to Venus, but it's kind of been ignored for many decades.
Mm.
Until about a few years ago, I was part of a team that reported the discovery of a gas on Venus, a gas that shouldn't be there, a gas that, at least on Earth, is only associated with life. And that gas is called phosphine.
Okay.
And you almost never hear about phosphine, but it's something we humans make as a pesticide. It seems like some bacteria and oxygen-free environments make phosphine, but we don't have phosphine like just naturally lying around. On Earth, it's really not favored thermodynamically. Well, this announcement of phosphine on Venus was about tiny, tiny amounts in the atmosphere. But literally, we investigated and wrote 100 pages out of all the way that phosphine might be produced, like lightning or volcanoes or meteorites burning up in the atmosphere. And we couldn't find any way that we could make phosphine, even at the tiny levels reportedly detected. So it
Oh,
leaves
wow.
room for the possibility that there is some kind of life there, like producing a gas that doesn't belong. And that's kind of, wow. So we made this big announcement. We explained the whole thing. And this result was not loved. Okay. Just as a
Okay.
euphemism, it was incredibly controversial. People challenged pretty much everything about this detection. And even though we very gently said maybe it's associated with life, that was basically trashed. So
Oh, my
that kind of whole
goodness.
thing is still out there. It's still lingering. It's largely not believed, but the original team stands by this report. However, that was enough to reignite interest in Venus. And
Mm.
not only that was enough to kind of shine a light on the people who've been working on studying Venus for decades, but also kind of reinvigorating this idea that maybe, just maybe, there's the possibility of some kind of microbial life floating around in Venus's atmosphere.
I mean, Venus, I mean, comparatively, we're gonna start speaking about, Alpha Centauri and far out planets, and trying to, I mean, your work has been really in trying to discover life way out there, or at least comparatively so. Why is it so hard to potentially answer the question about whether or not there's life in the atmosphere of Venus? I mean, that's our neighbor there. We should be able to know that pretty easily, comparatively speaking.
We really should, and it sounds like Andre. By the way, is that how you pronounce your name, Andre?
Yeah.
I forgot to ask you.
No,
Well,
sir.
by the way, Andre, I need you on my sales team because it is that easy. If we can go to Venus and send complicated machinery to analyze the gases and solids on Venus and look for very complicated molecules that are only associated with life, and in the distant future, bring a sample back here to Earth and literally put it under a microscope. That's what we want to do. It's just hard because it costs a lot of money. And let's face it, searching for signs of life, it is like a luxury. It's a luxury area, and we operate slowly because there isn't a lot of money for this type of work.
I see. I see. And so the bulk, perhaps, of what is being funded for, space exploration and things of that nature are perhaps around things that are, in some sense, for the people, going to bring back some money. They want to
Exactly,
go
exactly.
figure out how to get some resources and,
Okay, Starlink.
yeah.
Elon Musk's company has launched, I don't forget what we're up to now, but thousands of satellites orbiting Earth that are revolutionizing the way that we can have cell phone coverage. We can have data coverage. There's money there. There are a lot of other types of communication satellites. There's so much in low Earth orbit. Going further afield, people want to mine asteroids. They want to get very special elements that are rare on Earth and bring them back to Earth. So there are, most of the space economy is driven by profit.
Perhaps there's something in there, the intrinsic value or the non-monetary value in knowing we're not alone and starting to find out that there are other organisms out there amongst the stars. And I don't know if you can put a price on that, especially when you talk about what we value. If there's a price on pain and carnage and disunity, perhaps there's a price or a value on the other side of that. And I think that a narrative of our space in the universe, I mean, we've seen it in every, movie about alien invasion, right? It's like the humans come together and, we realize that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing and fighting and et cetera. And so I think that perhaps they're underestimating that, but I guess they can't necessarily squeeze the juice out of that themselves in a way that they can directly understand.
It's partly why I made the joke about Mars and Venus, because if there's not enough money to do all the wonderful things we want to do, you're sort of always fighting to get in the spotlight. But I just wanted to tell you a tiny bit more about Venus, because if you've learned about Venus in school, you'll learn it's like the evil twin sister, because Venus is so hot. The surface is hundreds and hundreds of degrees. It is hot enough to melt lead. Like we humans, we couldn't go to the surface and survive. We would just literally melt.
Oh my goodness.
But just like on Earth, if you climb a mountain or you go in an airplane, it gets colder and colder as you go above the surface. And that happens on Venus also. So a whopping 50 kilometers above the surface of Venus, it is the right temperature for life. And up in the atmosphere of Venus, there are clouds that are vertically extensive. They're 20 kilometers deep. They're across the entire planet. They're always there. And these clouds have a liquid environment because all life needs some kind of liquid so molecules can form and undergo chemical reactions. And did you know we have life in our clouds here on Earth? Bacteria are swept up from the surface. They go inside the cloud droplets. They might spend a week. They could spend like a week getting transported across continents. They rain back down. But in any this idea about life in the clouds of Venus, microbes in the cloud droplets, comes from over half a century ago. Carl Sagan first put this idea out there. The only kind of big problem is that the clouds of Venus, they're not made of friendly water, but they're made of a very, very nasty toxic chemical called sulfuric acid.
Mm-hmm.
This chemical destroys all of our life. It will burn a hole in your clothes and your skin. Yet, we have recently found that a bunch of biomolecules can survive in sulfuric acid, like our amino acids, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, we know that there's clouds on Venus in this zone that's above, the area where it's going to burn the lead, and it's just, obliterating all life. There's this sweet spot, and we now know from work, that different forms of life can actually survive in that environment.
Well, we're not quite there. We're making the argument that life might be able to survive this extremely toxic environment, but not our life. But thinking of little microbes, but they just have a different kind of set of building blocks of life.
I mean, beyond the financial hurdles, why do you think there was such a backlash of the possibility of life on Venus? Why were people so...
It's a great question. So we have this thing in science. I don't know if you have this in your line of work, but it's called the giggle factor.
Okay. No.
So do you ever tell someone, I'm going to do this, and then they just start laughing, or they try really hard to not laugh?
No, that's crazy.
Have you had that ever? Have you said...
I haven't had that. No, I mean,
really?
As bad as ideas can get in filmmaking, and you can say the most ridiculous things, I mean, just people laughing in your face is pretty wild, right? They can't help it. They think it's so silly.
Wait, you've never had that? You've never said, hey, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to run a marathon, and people are just like, have you had that ever?
I've had one roommate who was like that. And I just didn't tell him much after. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
You're like
Oh,
that. I don't
so,
really deal
yeah,
with
yeah.
people who are
So,
pessimistic or,
by the way,
you
one
know.
of the great things about being at MIT is they never laugh, they never say no. No matter how crazy the idea, as long as it's relatively sound, people believe it. But in any event, this idea of searching for life on Venus, it gets the giggle factor. People are like, whoa, because this chemical sulfuric acid, I can't even begin to tell you how nasty it is for our life. Like, if you put an, don't ask me how I know this, but if you put an ant in sulfuric acid, it literally has a seizure and turns to goo before you can blink an eye. Because in our molecules, like in our DNA, there are tiny molecules, like there's a sugar molecule in our DNA, and the sugar and sulfuric acid, they just don't mix. It just has like a crazy bad reaction. So because our biomolecules just get completely destroyed in sulfuric acid, not all of them, but some of them, we think people just have this idea that no life could ever survive in sulfuric acid no matter what. And that leads to thinking it's so crazy and not worth exploring.
But you've worked in the lab to show that different life forms can survive
Well,
in
wait, let's
sulfuric acid.
distinguish between a whole life form and just
Okay.
a building block, right? Think of it like Lego, like pieces of Lego could survive, but the whole giant Eiffel Tower built out of Lego, we're not there yet. We're just kind
Okay.
of, our life can't. We cannot take life forms and put them in sulfuric acid.
But at the same time, we can't create phosphine. Did I say right? Phosphine?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by create phosphine. Like,
Didn't you say there was the molecule in the atmosphere that we were trying to replicate in small
right.
amounts that we found in the atmosphere on Venus, right?
Well, in that sense, it's like just computer codes trying to create. We're not making it like, in the lab.
Okay.
And there are ways that phosphine can be generated just in such tiny amounts, or you need really contrived conditions. But that's what science is. We're exploring. It takes time. We're trying to build a case to go to Venus.
Yeah.
And to search for these complex molecules that might indicate life. And in the future, bring a sample back and look at it more directly.
Yeah, that'd be super exciting. And yeah, I'm thinking if it's hard for us to reproduce that molecule that we found, and then we shouldn't have to, basically prove that we can get life forms to survive in order to go for the search. You know what I mean? It's like things are difficult to replicate on other planets because we have a lack of understanding. So why don't we go ahead and increase that understanding?
I love it. I really have to add you to my team to go around with for selling our series of missions.
Yeah, that'd be very exciting for me. Yeah, we could talk more about